Jojima, Summer of Love 16. I think it's time to introduce you to Sally. This is the inside of Sally. Sally is the motorhome that I bought in 2018 when I was in that breaking the habit of being myself mode, of being this place where I realized I was stuck in old patterns of codependency, of self-abandonment, self-betrayal, which, by the way, are also known as codependency. Like, our whole society is just one big codependent coping mechanism. Trying so hard to figure this out and making it so much harder than it has to be. I loved what Kent said, that it was easy once he had the right lens on life. And so, can a shift of perception change everything? Yeah, I think it can. Let's see if that makes it a little less distracting on the glasses here. So I bought Sally and got her off the property. Remember, I had to take my foot off the brake and go all in. Got to Burning Man. Had all the feels at Burning Man of loving it, hating it, recognizing how uncomfortable I could be in a place and still manage, still cope. And so it was a real stretch for me, for somebody who had lived a life of curated comfort mostly. And so when I got home from Burning Man, Stephen and I went and sat by the river, committed to radical honesty, upped our game with each other. And about 10 days later, I went on the second half of my walkabout. And I drove off the property, not with fear and trembling, but with kind of a quiet excitement. And I tucked into this little 22-foot cocoon, and that's why I call it Sally, short for chrysalis, knowing full well that I was inviting a whole new lens of perception for my life on so many levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And you know, I had tried to do a sabbatical a couple of years, taking 5-6 weeks off. And I didn't do very good at that because I was home. I was still in the same patterns. And so I'm gonna plant a seed at the beginning of this, that if you have the option of disappearing into the woods for a while, if you have a place you can go where there's nobody there to create a reason for you to edit who you are, then please consider it. I headed out with I was going to be gone a month, maybe longer, but a month to start. And I did not know exactly where I was going to go. I had 3 friends along the way in Northern California that I had made a commitment to see. And then I realized I had to shift from a commitment to a possibility, because all of a sudden I was orienting toward the schedule of when I said I would be in their area, rather than allowing my nervous system the free will to wake up each day and go, where do you want to be next? And I found an RV app, and you can, you know, say, I'm looking for, and type in your criteria. And then, you know, I just began to feel into where my body wanted to go next. And I ended up going about 3,000 miles up to Oregon and Washington and back down to the middle of California. And I was gone almost 4 weeks. And the trip kind of went in 3 very, very distinct phases. There was round 1 was just getting used to being alone, just getting used to the quiet, trying hard not to get too caught up in what I should be doing, and I ended up at a place up near the Rogue River in Oregon, and it was raining. It was October, so it was raining, and I just remember tucking in for 3 days straight of absolute silence. And I got out and I walked to the river and was in nature, but I didn't have anybody I had to talk to. I didn't have anybody who was expecting to hear from me. And that was rare. That was very rare in my life. And maybe for some of you it may not feel like that big a deal, but my nervous system went through quite a bit of resistance to this state of quietness that I was stepping into, the stillness, and it was almost as though I knew, and you probably know too, what was coming. There was going to come a moment where the silence was going to start opening me up. And full disclosure, I had medicine with me every day, and not on days I had to drive, but on days I could sit really still, I journeyed. And it was cannabis mostly. And I allowed my nervous system to go to some very deep, quiet places. And the questions that had been coming to me since my mom had passed away, right after the channel opened up, and I had 2 to 4 hours a day of downloads for 2 to 3 years, I had been allowing all of these questions and inquiry to come in and processing them a little at a time. But it wasn't until this walkabout that I really began to play with the questions. So I shared some of them, but I'm going to give you all 5 of them and how they play out. The first question that really worked me from the very beginning, and probably from the beginning of my life, is, do I love myself enough to heal? If not, why not? What are the underlying contradictions to self-love? And I hear from people all the time that is the hardest piece of their personal work to do, is to have that full acceptance and appreciation and really loving who you are exactly as you are. Lumpy, bumpy, weighted, unweighted, talented, not talented according to all the external yardsticks, and yet there is something so powerfully unique about each of us that I've come to appreciate that's the part worth falling in love with, the unique parts, not the parts that we've molded and shaped to fit in with everybody else, but the quirky, the weird parts, the unique parts that are uniquely you. So question 1, I thought was going to be, do I love myself enough to heal? But I thought, no, that's too soon. People aren't ready for that one. We have to kind of ease into this conversation, this healing conversation. And I had been, playing with these questions a lot, but they didn't really have a framework yet. They were still just a constellation of questions. One of the other questions was, do you believe we can live in harmony? If not, why not? Another question was, how do we come to believe what we believe? And all of those have great depth to them. But then there was 2 more, but the final question was kind of easy. But this one, the one that became number 1, because they went through a lot of jockeying for position, because there is an inductive slide, a way of entering the conversation that I needed to test. I needed to go walkabout and ask people. So I went up to total strangers, RV parks. I've shared part of this story before. And there was, so this was 2018, and you can imagine we had a new president, and everybody was either up in arms or hands raised. You know, there was a lot of consternation, and that consternation traveled to RV parks, and people had signs, and oh, it was just fascinating to see how tightly wound we are into our curse of certainty, and we even bring it to RV parks. So I played a little bit with this question, and it's, are you ready for a healing conversation? Or to make it a little less confrontational, do you think we are ready for a healing conversation? And some people were like, what do you mean healing conversation? Like it was a threat. And others took it as kind of an invitation, like, what do you mean by a healing conversation? So that was really interesting to me. And it opened up some curiosity for me to think about that question through a couple of other lenses, like that phrase we have, are you ready, willing, and able to do something? How did that apply to this healing conversation, the healing conversation, the off-ramp to the insanity that we have found ourselves in, that we're waking up to, looking around going, wait a minute, why are people so unkind to each other? Why are we letting children suffer at the hands of our unconsciousness? And because I had spent so many years focusing on learning organizations, creating metrics to keep the learning going, that constantly give us feedback about what's working, what's not working. Are we on target to achieve our target condition? Are we masters of our own fate, or are we continually subject to our emotions and our coping strategies as the arbiter of truth? So are we ready, willing, and able to have a healing conversation? And so willing, man, that's an interesting word, like willing. What do I have to be? What am I signing up for? What is the willingness piece of the healing conversation? And until you come down this road a little way, you may not know what the fine print is on this awakening process, but I will share some of my fine print, and that has been that I was going to end up feeling very lonely for a while, and very isolated, and very unsure of this new path. Like, yeah, there was a lot of drama before, and I didn't like it, but at least I understood the rules. I knew how to dance in that chaos of unconsciousness. So when you step off that treadmill and exit that, there can be a period of time in between where you were and where you're going, where you can feel pretty loose and untethered to reality, or at least the reality you thought was reality. So willing is big. Are you willing to go through a dark night of the soul? Are you willing to go through the recalibration of people and jobs and activities and finances? Are you willing to dance in enoughness all the way down the rabbit hole of material possessions? Are you willing to dance in the enoughness of your own beingness? So enough, understanding enough, being sated in this human experience, because right now we are just over consuming everything, media and material things, and time, our most precious commodity, is slipping away from us. So are you willing to have a healing conversation? You know, what's the fine print on this coming into wholeness path? It's a lot. And I feel like sometimes people go into psychedelic spaces thinking that this is going to solve. I know I did. And it was great when my husband and I had our first introduction to a heart-opening situation. we sat nose to nose and said the things that we'd been unable to say to each other for about 15 years. Like, we had both been sort of walking on eggshells, not wanting to rock the boat, because we had a good relationship. We had a good thing going, but there was more. There was a beckoning and the becoming of who we could be, not just who we could be individually, but who we could be together. And so that sense of there's more, there's an ache. This week I sat with a beautiful human who arrived with that ache. Like, we're aware of it. I hear from so many people this is this all there is? You know, the song that I don't know, is that a 70s, 80s song? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? So what is? So willing to figure out what is, and consent to that. To consent to that isness is big business, right? Are you ready, willing, and able to have a healing conversation? The able part didn't come until much later in the conversation, because I realized there were parts of me that were ready and willing, but there was an ableness having to do with deep structural impediments to my healing process from early childhood trauma. And so I'll talk about the able piece a little further along in this 90 days. It's I'll just put a pin in it that ketamine was a major component of helping me get to an ableness for the depths of the healing conversation. So I'll just plant that seed here. So question 1 of the healing conversation was, are you ready, willing, and able to have what? To have not just any conversation, but the healing conversation, the conversation that was going to open the door for all of us to become a learning organism. You know, I spent so many years in that learning organization model of thinking, that closed loop of when we know better, we do better. And regardless of somebody's individual agendas, in a company setting, in an organism setting, in an organization setting, that's like the ultimate me-we balance, because everybody's captive, and because of how our capitalistic society works, our survival is tied to how we get along in those spaces, and we often go along to get along. That's just part of the deal. But there is a recognition that we spend 40 to 60 hours a week in these incubators of learning. And a lot of organizations, I realized very quickly, really didn't want truth. They wanted their agenda to be met in compliance, while at the same time being pranced out as transparency. And you know, there's this whole spectrum of financial fluency, and there's a body of work called open book management that was just really starting to take off in the 80s. And it had to do with trusting your employees with the information they need to do their jobs better, to give them feedback, and including sharing financial information, so that people could really become not entrepreneurs, but intrapreneurs, to see their role in the company as an opportunity to work both creatively within their own individual expression, but also within service to the greater good. So learning organizations. And our human construct is not very good at learning. We do a really good job of avoiding learning. We do a really good job of avoiding truth, because the truth that we have to face right now is pretty harsh, and it's going to take long range architectural blueprints based in trust and conscious collaboration, and to reimagine our entire construct feels just impossible. And even if we could imagine how we could get from and to, you'll hear me talk a lot about before and afterness. There's a metamorphic process in between. There's a chrysalis, there's a cocoon, there is a breakdown of our old structures down to the primordial buds, imaginal buds that inform our next iteration. And so that first question was a big question. Are we ready, willing, and even able to have a healing conversation? And as I said, I'll come back to the able part. So then the next question that felt like the logical is, well, let's start with, do you even believe we can live in harmony? Because that we have to fundamentally believe that it's possible for us to live in harmony, that the fact that we even have the phrase heaven on earth in our neuro toolkit, and I'll say it's a tool. Words are tools. That we even have that phrase in our nervous system, because when you say heaven on earth, we recognize a resonant place in that languaging of possibilities. So, do you believe we can live in harmony is like that. Harmony, live in harmony, heaven on earth. Like there's language in our nervous systems already encoded in there to accept that is a possibility, that we can even use the language and have consciousness around that. It says that it's possible. So now we've set a bar between heaven on earth, living in harmony, and we recognize there's a gap between that potentiality and where we are. And I said a few sessions ago about we would meet each other in our polarity rather than our unity. It's sad to think of it this way, but you see it again and again with natural disasters. People are willing to let go of the story they have about each other when we are in the middle of a flood, a fire, a famine, a natural event. We don't really like to let go of our certainty when we believe somebody deserves what their suffering is handing to them right now. But nature's different. Nature shows us there is no mercy. There is no, plan here to make us suffer. It's just there's consequences. There's laws of nature, and we are subject to them. And when we see people go through a very difficult natural disaster, all of the separation, all of the projection, all of the story that we have about each other seems to fall away. So that stuck with me. Like we not only can dream into harmony and heaven on earth, we witness it when things are at their worst. Mostly, sometimes COVID. Oh man, if we could rewrite COVID, the underlying challenge with COVID is we don't trust. We don't trust who's got the answers. We don't trust people's agendas. Like the disease of COVID is the disease of trust, that we just don't trust. So what if we have more disasters where we do have to come together? How will we ever trust? So these leveling events that are coming at us, nature's teaching us, showing us how all of our separations, all of our story won't be helpful at all for any of us when times are hard. So, are you ready, willing, and able to have a healing conversation? Question 2, do you believe we can live in harmony? And they all said, I'd like to. RV park by RV, I'd like to, but. And so that I'd like to was another one of those heaven on earth, harmony, I'd like to. These are universal meeting points within the human condition that began to sort of come to life in me. And I began, when I talk about matrix, the mechanics of shift within this matrix, this construct that we're living in, this is what I was feeling for, is we have gotten very good at agreeing to disagree about a lot of things. We have become very skilled in putting off the inevitable question. But yes, that's great that we don't agree on that, but we can't seem to let each other just live with our own beliefs. We are in this ideological supremacy race to win the story of what is this human existence. And so I'm dancing a little bit, but I'll just say there's a lot of religious ideological supremacy. And having spent 35 years in that world, I can say that it is one of the greatest impediments we have, structural, institutional, even sanctioned by our tax system impediments to rebooting our human construct. This sense of my way or the highway first became really clear to me when I was growing up. So I was baptized Catholic, and those of you who come from that persuasion will recognize it's a spectrum of engagement. Some of my family members were deeply engaged, others less so. I was sort of middle of the road, showed up on holidays, Christmas and Easter, and we went to church, and my mother explained catechism to us and explained God and the Holy Trinity and heaven and hell and eternity. And I think I was like 4 or 5 at that point. And even then I was like, what? Heaven or hell? Like, this hell part really didn't line up with me, even from the very beginning. So Catholicism didn't work for me. As a 12-year-old, I was invited with a group of girlfriends to go to church camp. And church camp was an evangelical Christian camp. And everybody was getting baptized who wasn't already while they were at camp. That was the thing to do. And so I went along with that. And I love the idea of God and Jesus and the teachings, the gospel of love. I was there. I was 100% there with that aspect of formal religion. Some of the other structural and projected belief systems into that gospel of love is what eventually got me out of religion. But back when I was 12, I was all in, and I wanted to get baptized. And he said, well, we have to get permission from your parents. So I called my home, and Mom was like, oh, you've already been baptized. You're baptized Catholic. So, as far as the Bible's concerned, you're good to go. And I said to the youth pastor, I'm baptized. We got this. And he said, no. It wasn't a John the Baptist full immersion baptism. Those are the only ones that count. Catholics aren't Christians anyways. He didn't say that, but you could just feel the edge of ideological supremacy. And now looking back on that, I laugh a little bit, but I was pretty savvy for 12, but I didn't have the self-competence, the wherewithal to really hold my truth above anybody else's. I always was like, well, they must know better, right? So I said, Mom, it's got to be a full immersion, got to go deep. And she said, it's okay, go ahead, do it. And so I was baptized into this evangelical Christian community, and almost immediately was immersed in the work of bringing more people in, like it was a multi-level marketing scheme. And it wasn't about the expansion of soul within the teachings as much as it was about, continually building the community, building a kingdom of heaven here on earth. Like it could only happen a certain way. And so after a couple years of that, that sort of waned in my interest. And a friend that I'd had in middle school and high school, we were good friends, and he invited me to come to his church. I was curious, still a seeker. I went to the Mormon church with him, weekday seminary, and didn't go on Sunday, just went to seminary, which was all a bunch of high school kids eating donuts, laughing, funny teacher. They always pick the best teachers, the returned missionaries with great outgoing personalities to teach seminary, to keep the high schoolers to get up at 6 a.m. to get to seminary by 6:30. It was a good gig if you were the right teacher. And we became good friends, this boy and I. And 3 years out of high school, we ran into each other. He had just gotten back off his mission. And we ended up going on a date that first night, and the rest was kind of history. Fell in love, and I said almost immediately, I know enough about Mormons to know that they're an all-in kind of a faith, and the only way we can continue to date each other, I guess, is if I can swallow this church thing. And he said, yeah, that's kind of how it works. And missionaries were called in, and I listened with an open heart, and I loved the Mormon view of family and children. Catholics, you're born a sinner, you spend your whole life trying to recoup yourself from that story. Evangelical Christians, you're saved by Christ, and so there's this sort of get out of jail free card, and that was better than the eternal damnation storyline. But both still had this supremacy of, we're the ones who have the answers, our version of the Bible, our version of the interpretation of that Bible, which was always fascinating to me because different churches read out of the same book and got very, very different, conflicting interpretations out of that. So that I was curious about that. In order to become Mormon, guess what? I had to be baptized again, a third time. And I should have at that moment really paid attention, but I loved the guy, and I loved the community, and I loved the idea that children were born perfect, and that they choose their parents, which was a hard thing for me to swallow at that point. I wasn't really feeling like I'd gotten the fair end of that deal. I have a different view now, but in those days. But I loved their community, and I loved how they came together. I learned Joji in the Mormon church, the joy of joining in church dinners and service projects, and went to the prisons and sat with women and painted their nails and helped with their hair. And I'd never been involved in service work like that before. And that was like, yeah, this is how we're supposed to show up in service to each other and in support of each other, without judgment, without, really the separation that I'd felt in other more sort of judgmental places. So Mormons had some good stuff going for them. And I had to get baptized again. I said, I've done the full immersion, John the Baptist. And they said, well, yeah, but you didn't do it, in the one true church. You were baptized into a church that has false teachings. Ours is the one true church. They even talked about piano keys. Some churches have the white keys. Some churches have the black keys. We have all the keys. Keys to the kingdom. And so under the heading, I thought it was a good idea at the time, as my dear friend Jeannie says, you make your choices and you go down a path. And I taught Sunday school for 14 years in that path. And when I finally could no longer walk that path, I stepped away. And I thought I was done with religion. I was really kind of over the whole, ours is the one true church. And we're the only ones who are going to get to go to heaven. And if you leave the church, man, you might as well have never come in. And so I'm going to do something right here that's kind of wild. When you go through the temple and you're given your endowments and you're given your special underwear and you make your special covenants and you learn the secret handshakes, you're also given a temple name. And it took me 10 years to say this word out loud that I'm about to say to you, because I was, as much as I was out of the church, man, the doctrine of fear kept me from saying that my name is Lydia, according to the temple records, on the day that I went through and received my endowments, my covenants. And it's necessary for me to offer up that name at the veil that I can be brought through by my ex-husband. And my pathway to heaven is still through him, because I'm sealed for all time and eternity to him. So yeah, it took me a long time to share that my name is Lydia and I'm going to hell for telling you that. That's how deeply ingrained these doctrinal, ideological, supreme ideas go, and they get wound deep into your fear. And so I left that church, but I had always had this inquiry about, well, why did I believe those things? What was I looking for? Where was the actual belief versus the wanting to fit in, wanting to belong? Because community is a pretty seductive co-regulator of our co-agitator. That's another role it can play, of our nervous systems. And so that inquiry stayed with me. And so that fed into this healing conversation body of inquiry that was starting to come through. So that, are you ready, willing, and able to, have a healing conversation? Question 2, do you believe we can live in harmony? If not, why not? And what would we have to believe about each other to live in harmony? And the belief part was that thread from all those years in the church kept coming up. How do we come to believe what we believe? So that's question 3 of the healing conversation. How do we come to believe what we believe? And then there's this new layer that's come forward in this last few years as I've watched that curse of certainty, that ideological supremacy, just undermine so much about be an underlying contradiction to our source code of love. So, question 3, how do we come to believe what we believe? Are you willing to fact check your fears? And then that's, we have alternative facts. So how do you fact check in a world where truth is lies and lies is truth? And this is why that download that first night Mom died it's in service to helping us reattune to our inner guidance system, that truth can be met in our nervous system, in our path to consciousness, which is what our nervous system is the keeper of, right? So if you are still operating in a wounded, hypervigilant, hyperreactive state, you are not going to be able to access your own inner guidance system. To find truth. That ability is lost when we are operating from fear. Only when we're operating from a place of love is that access open to us. It's always there, but our ability to access the collective consciousness, the collective conscious collaboration that's coming forward right now, the code sharing, the code adjacency, the expansion of consciousness being amplified whenever two people come together and acknowledge the expansion of consciousness. We're witnessing and expanding with each other. So this it's happening. I see it every day in the people I sit with, in ceremony, in the places where we find each other on the interwebs. It's there. It's there. So I think there are a lot of people who are willing to look at how they've come to believe what they believe about what they believe. And that lens of perception is that higher level. This talked about Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, and coming into awareness of your observer, the one who's paying attention to all the noisy, roommatey, self-critical, self-abandonment, learned self-abandonment and criticism in our heads. And I would offer you that if you just squint, softer gaze on the human condition, there's another lens that's above that, where we're not only witnessing the noise in our psyche and our own psychodrama that we are coming into awareness of, there is a collective psychodrama that we're coming into awareness. Like waking up across the planet is akin to coming into collective self-awareness, just becoming aware that we are the authors of our story. And so the authoring starts with that we lens of perception, we observer versus just the me observer. So from the we observer viewpoint, you can begin to see nothing as personal. Everything is exactly as it needs to be in order for us to continue to form more that perfect union that our founding fathers were so present to. So, are you ready, willing, and able? Do you believe we can live in harmony? If not, why not? What would we have to believe? Our beliefs are the challenge. How do we come to believe what we believe? And that's the movie we're going to have on Saturday night. So if you want to look it up on Prime and watch it and be part of the conversation this weekend, it's called Lottery of Birth. And it's just a really well done conversation around how we came to believe what we believe and about what we believe. Like our certainty on those beliefs is pretty hardwired into us, and for no good reason, other than that's just how our neurobiology works. And so now we, thank you, Andrew Huberman and Joe Dispenza and so many other neuroscientists who are starting to help us unpack the slavish relationship we have with our minds, and to create some space, as Viktor Frankl says, that space between stimulus and response, to become consciously responsive in the moment rather than reactive. Like we're understanding more and more, and when we know better, we do better. So beliefs, and the hardest beliefs to shake from question number 3 are the beliefs we have about ourselves, because those are the ones that were imprinted into us pre-verbally. In the womb, there's an increasing number of people that are chatting about the consciousness of the mother and how that sets the tone for the infant's consciousness. And in some indigenous tribes, they protect the mother from, even before she's pregnant, the idea that she's going to become pregnant. They protect the father from the trauma of things happening. In other words, they understand the biological impact on the fetus based on where the consciousness of the parents are, what are they operating in fear, and so we Gabor does a whole piece on this in his book Myth of Normal. The way that we treat women in their childbearing years is really pretty bad. When you think about, if we are trying to create a more conscious place for children to come into, we wouldn't leave mothers in poverty. We wouldn't leave them to struggle at a survival level when they're in the process of creating a setting for the next generation to come on board. So, we could have a whole other conversation about maternal destiny and when it's right and when it's right not to have children. And so there we are at this place of dealing with our beliefs that the underlying contradictions to self-love. And so this is question number 4. Do I love myself enough to heal? If not, why not? And we had to sneak up on it because it's the hardest one. We can actually get to the conversation about harmony and heaven on earth faster and easier than the conversation about heaven and harmony from within. So do I love myself enough to heal? If not, why not? And so while I was on my walkabout in Sally, these questions came forward and I wrote them down, and I played with different orders. Was it better to start with this question or that question? How would you present it to people? What would the follow-up questions look like? Because everything's about the quality of questions we ask. There is a rational autocorrect in our thinking, in our amygdala, our fear-based lizard brain who's still constantly reacting. But there is a moment in there where we can supersede that reactivity with some rational thought. And so the healing conversation started to really come together while I was on the road for that walkabout for 4 weeks. And when I came home, I had a little bit of a bone spur, and I ended up in a very interesting position of having to sit very, very still. And I'll save that for the next lesson. Do you love yourself enough to heal? If not, why not? Do you believe we can live in harmony? And if there's a yes, but in there, it's going to come down to this core question of, do you love yourself enough? Because if you can answer yes, then there is no more but. There is no more but for any other person. You want that for everyone. Do I love myself enough to heal? Yes, I do. And do I believe we can live in harmony? Yes, I do. And the power of and. May it be so. Aho.